Always back at you. So let's dive into this Bears, unfortunately. And I say unfortunate, Mark, because I feel there's a part of me that feels like that I'm in a good mood right now, and Sunday night may be the prolonged period of time where I'm not in a good mood, especially when we have to provide content that's surrounding the Bears if the Bears aren't going well. So Brad Biggs from the Tribune reported that Eddie Goldman is doubtful for this game. Looking at past games versus the Los Angeles Rams, part of the key was stopping the run and forcing it on Jared Goff. Now Jared Goff is gone, and now it's a whole better quarterback in Matthew Stafford. But particularly when it comes to stopping the run, what's your expectation with Eddie Goldman out, and who steps into that role first? I know they brought in two defensive tackles, but also Kyrus Tonga being drafted in the latter rounds of the draft. Who's going to step up? Because I'm leery of Bilal Nichols having to move over again from the 5 technique.
Yeah, absolutely. And I imagine that Bilal Nichols will cover some of it. You mentioned the rookie 7th rounder, Kyrus Tonga, as well. I'm not sure how ready he is at this point. I mean, all of the grades on him in camp have been positive, but that doesn't mean he's ready for the prime time. So I think Tonga will get some run. Another guy who's had a very successful camp has been Angelo Blackson, so I imagine that he probably would have been in the rotation anyway, but we'll have to see how they use them and rotate those guys. And I think it's going to be a matter of what they see is working best in that regard, and it is tough. I mean, finally, it looked like we were going to see, and we haven't seen a lot of it over the last 2-3 years, and that is those two guys, Akeem Hicks, being on the field at the same time as Eddie Goldman. Just we haven't seen a lot of it, and you've seen the effects of it. So, yeah, he is doubtful, and I've been there every day this week. It doesn't feel good. Doubtful probably means he's not going to play. It just feels that way because he hasn't stepped on the practice field. Haven't seen him one time in the last couple of days. So, yeah, I think you're going to have to figure out, at least for this week, life without him, without Eddie Goldman. And I unfortunately, I don't have a great answer for exactly who is going to be the stalwart in that spot, but I think they're going to try everybody, or those 3 guys that I mentioned.
Grote, being the fact that you had your eyes on this team the entire camp, did you notice any differences from the last 2 years compared to this camp outside of course, it not being in Bourbonnais and it being at Hallis Hall?
Yeah, I mean, because everything was so messed up last year, obviously, with COVID, there really wasn't much of a camp. So one of the goals that Matt Nagy had this year was moving things along a little bit more quickly, like having the pace be more rapid while they were out there on all the fields. I think I did see some of that, like the movement compared to previous years that I've covered training camp. And I don't really know what that means exactly, or if that helps in any way, shape, or form. I imagine it's just a way to keep everybody on the same page and keep attention high out there. So, yeah, I mean, I thought it was a pretty good camp overall. You always have guys that stand out in training camp and, make names for themselves. And we saw some of that during this camp as well. So, we'll see what it all means. And I think that the biggest part of training camp for all of us, or those of us who cover it, is that we were so locked in on every move that Justin Fields made that this was, and it took me, this long to get to that. And when you ask about training camp, it was about Justin Fields and sparing him. Forget everything else I just said. That was all a bunch of BS, but all that malarkey I just made up. What was that? It was about Justin Fields and every step that dude took and who he was playing with and where the ball was being thrown and what offensive line was out there with. Forget everything else. It was about Justin Fields.
All right, since I'll get back to Matt Nagy in a minute since you brought up Justin. All right, if Mark Grote, and of course that David show, this is Mark Grote on with this, follow him at Mark Grote Sports. If you had your druthers, how would you bring Justin Field along, Coach Mark Grote?
Well, Well, I actually think that they've done a pretty good job so far with the way that they have handled him, just because, honestly, we've seen development in him from the first couple of days of training camp. And I remember watching those first couple practices of his and watching Justin Fields make mistakes and seeing a huge gap between Andy Dalton and Justin Fields, as in Dalton looked a lot better. And I've been saying it throughout this camp. It's bumper to bumper now. Like, the gap has been closed. We have seen development out of him. That is Justin Fields. And he is so close to being ready or passing up, or at least getting even with Andy Dalton. So how would I develop him and bring him in? I think it would be really smart at this point to get him out there. I know that there is a divide on whether or not Justin Fields should come in and start a clean game, or maybe you have certain packages for Justin Fields where he comes in, whether it's red zone or goal line or something else. It doesn't have to be those two things. I do think it would be smart to get him a taste of that, not only for his sake and getting a taste in an NFL game in which he is not completely responsible for if Andy Dalton is starting, but also because the dude is a playmaker. And the Bears have been starving for not just a quarterback for all these years, man, but playmakers. They've got one guy who is legit in that regard. Allen Robinson, he's a playmaker. Darnell Mooney might be. David Montgomery might be. Cole Kmet might be. But right now, we know that Robinson is, and I'm pretty damn sure that Justin Fields is a playmaker too. So I'd like to see them bring him in, even in this game against the Rams, and I would like to see them start him sooner than later, like somewhere in the first 5 games of the year, just because you got to see it. You got to see what he has and if he really has closed the gap the way I think he has.
I'm with you, Grote. I was a bye week guy, and just watching him throughout camp and preseason, I got to week 3. Well, I was kind of like, you know what? We can hasten this pace up. About early in the first quarter, like you said, about week 5. Now, listen. I have some hesitance with starting him. I think they should have a package for him in every at least every half, if not twice. But I'm leery because of the offensive line, and it's frustrating. And I know that a lot of people aren't fans of Charles Leno Jr. But to sit there and to cut him when you at least had someone that's serviceable at left tackle, and you would have only had to worry about right tackle. It seems like you're going to cut your nose to spite your face, and it came to fruition as far as what happened with this offensive line. What are your expectations for this offensive line? How many games, for instance, do you believe Jason Peters has in him? Because I think it's asking a lot if you think he can stay healthy for the entirety of the season.
I mean, I think the Bear. I think optimistically half the season, maybe. I mean, we're going to find out pretty quickly. We're going to know. Probably in this game against the Rams, what kind of shape he is in, whether he is able to remain stable at that left tackle, and the scary part is that his backup is a rookie in Larry Borom, and I think that we can all say, like, I'm pretty high on Larry Borom, but he's a 5th round pick and he's a rookie. So the idea of just throwing him in there and thinking he is ready is just not a realistic option at this point. So, yeah, I mean, we're going to find out a lot about Jason Peters. But, I agree with you about the offensive line. And there is the theory of, all right, well, since Justin Fields is an elusive, mobile quarterback, he might be better suited for this offensive line if it is to break down. And I'm like, no, that's a bunch of garbage, in my opinion.
Me too. Because
he's going to be running a lot. And you know what? Players who run, they get tackled sometimes. Sometimes they get hit. So, Andy Dalton, his act is getting rid of the ball. And Justin Fields' act is running. So I think that there's more inherent danger, actually, with a running quarterback than there is with somebody like Andy Dalton, who has the ability to or the want to throw the ball away. So early on, I bought into that. I got to admit, I've kind of flip-flopped on this. I bought into the idea that Justin Fields, well, you got to get him in there against us. No, you don't want your rookie going out there. And yeah, he might make splash plays, running plays, but maybe the sixth time he has to run and avoid the pass rush of Aaron Donald and Leonard Floyd, maybe that's the time he gets hurt. So I don't like the idea of it. And I think the offensive line is going to be, unless they surprise us, unless, Jason Peters is what he once was, or to some degree, I think it's going to be a work in progress all year. It might be like last year, where in the last 5 or 6 games, remember when they realigned everything and they came up with Gold and Sam Mustipher and getting Cody Whitehair back to guard. And it's, obviously good that James Daniels is back this year. So your interior is good. But until they know that those two outside guys are the stalwarts you need in the NFL, you're going to see a pretty conservative game plan out of Matt Nagy, which I think for some purposes might be good.